Hi, TPO staff. Um, you might remember I introduced myself yesterday. My name is Justin Knox, and I am an assistant professor of epidemiology at Columbia University. And I have been working with Flora on this project, the Journey of Life project. Um, and part of that, I've been working with her on this training that you are attending now, and that unfortunately we can't be there in person for. And one of the topics that I've been asked to lead a discussion on is research ethics. So I've prepared the following slides, and I'm recording myself speaking through them. And then I'm hoping that this can hopefully lead to some questions that I'll take at the end as I join you guys virtually. And then um, also, some exercises that we may or may not do now or later, depending on how things work, as well as just a discussion and thoughtfulness and consideration of research ethics. Because from my experience, this is an ongoing process. When considering how to make research ethical and to make sure that the work what we're doing is respectful and beneficial to the participants, and things often come up that we don't foresee. Um, and so it's a process as much as learning. But this is hopefully to get that conversation started, those thoughts started, and then we can um, continue to think about these things. So the study that you are helping conduct, that we've designed and gotten funded, is one that involves human subjects. It's called human subjects research, and therefore, it's important to remember these guiding principles for human subjects research. So, human subjects, the participants of the study, are essential to the conduct of research, right? There's certain things that can't be learned in a laboratory or through simulations or we need to actually, with animals, we need to actually do them with people. And that involves a certain responsibility by the researcher then to make sure that that research is being conducted in an ethical way. So as such, the relationship between investigators and human subjects is critical and should be based on honesty, trust, and respect. So that's from protecting human research participants. That's sort of some guidelines for research that's funded by the National Institutes of Health. But I think it applies to this project as well. All human subjects research essentially, and I should say that prior to this project happening, and what's happening right now, and that Flora has worked on, and that all of the research staff has helped do is to propose this study in an ethical way and to make sure that we've had approval, or we will have approval from an institutional review board. So an outside group that will review what we plan to do, or is reviewing what we plan to do, and is making sure that it's fair and ethical, and that it adheres to their guidelines for how to treat human subjects. But then beyond what's proposed, on paper, there's the actual conduct of the research, and so that not only needs to sort of match what's being proposed, but also needs to that we all know that in the real world, when things actually happen, things come up that aren't exactly as scripted or as planned. And so I think we need to always keep these concepts in mind. So that's why it's helpful we think for you all to have some understanding of what we're proposing and why ethics are an important component of all human subjects research in this project, especially. So a human subject means a living individual about whom an investigator, whether a professional or a student, is conducting research. So we obtain information or biospecimens through intervention or interaction with the individual, and use studies or analyze the information or biospecimens. Or we obtains, uses, studies, analyzes, or generates identifiable private information or identifiable biospecimens. So our research, this is kind of technical speak, but our research definitely falls under this category, right? Because there's going to be an intervention that's delivered to this community, right? The journey of life intervention. And then we're also going to collect information from the individuals that participate in this intervention, as well as others that don't, right? And we're going to try and see whether or not that intervention leads to changes, to improvements in these people's lives, right? And so this is exactly the type of research that meets those definitions. And so beyond that, it's important to remember that the specific populations in the setting that you all be working in is defined as a particularly sensitive research population and topic, right? Because we'll be working with, refugees, right, in a refugee settlement, as I'm sure you all know better than I do, the challenges and the uniqueness of that setting, but also the sensitivity, as well as working among those who are socioeconomically or educationally disadvantaged, right? So we not only, you always need to be sensitive, when conducting human subjects research and ethical, but particularly so when you're working with sensitive populations or on sensitive topics. So that's why it's especially critical, I think, to be having this discussion today. So when I say research ethics, what do I mean? So I think it's essential that there's some, guiding principles. So first, it's essential that the participants trust that the information they will be sharing with us will be kept confidential, right? And that efforts are made to ensure that. Also, it's unlikely that the information provided by participants or community members will be reliable unless the research staff behave in an ethical way, right? So it's not only important to the protection of the participants, but it's also important to the integrity of the research, right? Because everyone, has to choose to participate, right? It has to be voluntary, and consent needs to be informed and voluntary, right? But also it's to our own detriment to not behave this way, because if people don't trust you as an investigator, they're not going to disclose this information. And what you need is, you're trying to get at reliable and valid information from the people that are helping us by participating in the research, and hopefully that we're helping them too, right? So it's meant to be a dialogue and a mutually beneficial process. And it's important that the staff communicate these principles to the research participants, right? It's not just for us to know, it's for them to know, because, it's important to determine the success of the study. So it's not only are we going to make efforts to keep this information confidential, to protect the human subjects, to make sure our research is ethical, but also to communicate that to the participants, and through various processes that I'm going to describe, they might already be familiar with, such as, voluntary informed consent and the other procedures that we'll be putting in place to ensure confidentiality and to ensure that the information we collect remains confidential and is protected to the best of our abilities. So there are three fundamental ethical principles for research involving human subjects, and it must be conducted in accordance with these three basic ethical principles. And these were determined by the Belmont Report, which is, something that was created in the United States, and it was prompted by previous violations in terms of ethical research. So these were principles that have been determined as a requirement, a basic requirement for all human subjects research. So the first is respect for persons, right? Respect for the participants in the study and a recognition of their autonomy, right? They are choosing to participate, and we need to respect that choice of theirs, and they have the right to be informed about what the study involves and what the objectives are and how it be conducted. The second ethical principle is beneficence. We are balancing risks and benefits, right? Like, and the risks need to be minimalized, and we need to be clear about what are the benefits and try to maximize those, right? And lastly, justice, right? There needs to be an equal distribution of the risks and benefits, right? So, we shouldn't expect disadvantage others to bear the burden of research. It should be equally distributed as much as possible. And so, these are all important ethical principles to consider, and they were taken in mind as we developed the study and developed the institutional review board protocol, and they also need to be maintained as we actually conduct the study. So let me elaborate a bit more on each of these three guiding ethical principles. So the first one is respect for persons, and that's respect for individuals' autonomy. Those capable of making informed choices should be treated with respect for their self-determination, right? We can't say this is in your own interest to participate in this study. You're getting this intervention, so you need to do this, right? It's their decision, it's their life, and there's no forcing anyone to participate or to disclose information, right? It's completely voluntary. And of course, as investigators, we want to get all the information we can. We don't want to lose people to follow up. We don't want people to decline to participate, but that is their decision, right? And we have to respect that. And this requires that those dependent or vulnerable be afforded security against harm or abuse, right? So there's no penalties for not participating. Um, they should feel no persuasion to have to participate. And this principle is usually applied through the informed consent process, right? Something I mentioned before, something you might be familiar with. So potential participants are provided with information on the research study and asked to make a voluntary choice about their participation, right? And so I know informed consent forms have been developed. I don't know if they've been finalized, approved, if they'll be ready for today, but at one point when they are, or if they already are, that's a document that you'll become intimately familiar with over the course of the project, because every participant will need to be provided informed consent, right? They'll need to be informed about the study so that they can make a decision on whether or not to participate based on that information. And so, and that document, as you see it, will includes information about the study, about what will be done with the information we collect, what are the risk benefits, and it's an important document, and everyone whose data is going to be used for the study will need to provide some type of informed consent, or if it's a minor, perhaps assent and then consent from a parent or legal guardian. The second is beneficence, right? So that refers to the ethical obligations to maximize benefits and minimize harms, including physical, psychological, and social harms, right? So this principle is put into practice as norms requiring that the risk of research be reasonable in light of the expected benefits, right? So norms that research design be sound, right? So I'll elaborate on each of these. And then norms that investigators be qualified to conduct the research and safeguard the welfare of the research participant, right? So those norms requiring that the risk of the research be reasonable in light of the expected benefits. I think that means we have to minimize any potential risks involved in participating. Oftentimes, this is a loss of confidentiality, right? That the information they disclose to you could be shared. It could be harmful if it was, found out by their peers or their family. Then then that would involve some risk for them. And it's not us to determine whether or not we think information is risky, right? Any information we can assume that we want to protect people's confidentiality for sharing it with us. So we have to minimize that risk, right? And also, the 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 study should be guided by, a desire to do good, right? That their benefits should be there, right? We compensate for participants for their time. We're studying something that will hopefully lead to an improvement in people's lives, right? We're trying to learn about the problems in their lives or learn about ways to improve their lives, which I think the journey of life does, but that needs to be clear and that needs to be communicated to them. And we need a research design that's sound, right? So that the information we collect and the work that we do can actually lead to um, actual a contribution of knowledge, right? So we know this, right? So you can't just, oh, I feel like asking people a bunch of questions because I think it would be interesting to learn about their lives. No, you need a sound project with true, actual benefits. You need to minimize the risks, and there needs to be um, demonstration that this is being done in a rigorous way so that it can actually lead to something productive. And then the third is that the investigators and you as TPO staff are now part of the investigative team, be qualified to conduct this research, right? So that's why you all likely need to go undergo some kind of ethical training, some way of documenting this. And we as the research staff also need to show that we're qualified to do this kind of study, that we have the mechanisms in place to protect people's information, and collect it and safeguard things. Um, so those three, you can see how all of these principles apply to the project and the research. And then the last is justice. So justice refers to the ethical obligations to treat each person in accordance with what is morally right and to give each person what is due to him or her, right? So that's an equitable distribution of the burden and benefits of research participation, right? We can't expect, we couldn't expect refugees to participate in the study so that we can learn whether or not the journey of life intervention will work for other types of people, right? If they're the ones that are undergoing the burden of the research, we want to learn about whether or not that intervention helps them, whether or not what we're learning about will help them, right? And then we want evidence that communities participating in research will benefit from the research studies, right? So that needs to be communicated and clear to the participants that what are the benefits, what are the risks, and it's up to their decision ultimately whether or not they think it's worth participating. So then we can think about the application to research conduct, right? So the respect for persons, I mentioned that recognition of autonomy, just review. We see that in consent. We also see that in the need to protect vulnerable populations, right? Respect that as a vulnerable population, there might need to be extra efforts to ensure that, the compensation for their participation isn't, overly persuasive for them to participate, right? It's not taking advantage of them, making it seem like they need to participate because they need that compensation, right? Um, Beneficence, right? Balancing risks and benefits. So we need to take into account, think through what are the risks and benefits, and then communicate that to the participants so that they understand the risks and they know, they're choosing to participate in mind and knowing those risks in mind, but still believing that it's the right thing to do, right? That those benefits outweigh those risks. And lastly, justice, right? The distributing risks and benefits. So that for that reason, we have, the appropriate inclusion exclusion criteria, the methods we use to recruit participants, how we disseminate those results, and how we engage with the communities where we conduct research, right? And I know from my own research experience, communities don't like it if you just come in and collect a bunch of information about them and then never speak to them again, right? There needs to be, and this is an area where there needs to be improvement, right? Because we need to get these results out to the community. we need to do a better job of helping them understand why this research is important and what it leads to, and to share these products with them, and also make sure they're a part of, creating those products. So informed consent, this is, as I mentioned, is going to be, a key of the project. No one is going to be able to participate without completing voluntary informed consent. Um, Informed consent is based on the principle that competent individuals are entitled to choose freely whether to participate in research, right? Informed consent protects the individual's freedom of choice and respects the individual's autonomy, right? That's why it's important that even if you've done this form 70 times and everyone always says yes and just signs at the end, that you still go through that form and read it with them, so that you're acknowledging that they are an autonomous individual with the freedom to choose whether or not to participate, and that they need this information in order to understand it, right? You can't just assume they won't understand this part, I don't need to read it to them, or um, I know no one has a problem with this, so I assume they won't either, right? It's their decision, it's their autonomy, and we need to be respectful of that, right? So participants must be given an opportunity to refuse participation based on an understanding of what he or she is being asked to do, and that there should be no implied or real negative consequences for refusal, right? There can't be like, you need to do this or else, right? Because that's not voluntary. Or when people refuse, and obviously it can be disappointing. You want everyone hopefully to participate and benefit from it, but ultimately it's their decision. And we acknowledge that, and then there's not going to be, as research, like the leadership team, we're not, uh, data collectors or study staff can't be held to participation rates, because we know it's not, everyone needs to do a good job in explaining the informed consent and that, but we can't, ultimately it's the participants' decision, and they're free to make that, and we have to be respectful of that. And we also have to be respectful that'll happen regardless of, as long as we're following the protocols and providing the informed consent, that's ultimately their decision. So informed consent is consent given by a competent individual, right? They need to be competent and able to understand it, who has adequately understood the information regarding the study, and who's arrived at a decision about participation without having been subjected to coercion, undue inducement, or intimidation, right? They're completely free to make that decision. And we could talk through scenarios, if I was there in person, I could ask you, well, what would feel like coercion or intimidation, or how could you imagine that? And especially in this context, we could think about that, like, you know, to us as people not from that community, as people that appear to have access to resources, is that creating some influence on whether or not people will participate? Will they be concerned that if they don't participate, that something bad will happen to them? These are things we need to think through, right? Would people have that impression, or is that unlikely? And we need to make it clear that that's not happening, right? And that people, and we do that partially by doing this informed consent and helping them to understand, like, we're an investigative team, right? You're part of TPO staff, you're an NGO that works in this area, but you want to collect data on this project, and it's not going to influence their access to other services that TPO offers or that other NGOs or organizations offer, right? And this is just their decision whether or not to provide that information for the study. And so that always needs to be clear. And as you can see, there's gray areas. It's not always straightforward, I think. So it's good to think through that. So as I mentioned, there's going to be an informed consent form, and it has different components, right? There'll be an introduction where you introduce yourself and the study. There's a statement: what is the research study? It describes the purpose of the research, expected duration of the research, right? You can't just assume I'll come back for the rest of your life and collect any information when I need it. It's like, this is going to be for a defined period of time. What are the procedures involved? I'll be coming to your house once, 6 months later, whatever they may be, and expectations of them, requirements for participating, right? Do they need to complete a questionnaire? Do they need to provide a blood sample or a urine sample, something of that nature? And not in this case, but that you can see how it needs to be spelled out. And what are the potential risks or discomforts, right? And some of these we're projecting, right? We're assuming, but we need to think about it. We're asking questions about sensitive topics, maybe about interpersonal violence or intimate partner violence or sexual abuse or anything, about negative feelings or moods or substance use, things that can invoke bad memories or that, disclosing things about their life that could be viewed as potentially endangering to them. So we need to think through those and what makes them uncomfortable, what might put them at risk. So what are the anticipated benefits too, right? How will the journey of life intervention and knowing whether or not it works in this setting potentially benefit them? Maybe it's not meant, oftentimes it's not meant to directly benefit the participants. And we need to say that, right? We can say like, well, this is kind of to contribute to knowledge, but not necessarily you're going to get the intervention, whether, whether we know it works or not in this case. So that's not really a benefit. And we just need to be explicit about that. And what are alternatives to participating, right? I think it's almost always they can refuse to participate, right? But can they still get the intervention? Can they still get other services? Um, Oftentimes, are there, and in many cases, it's in a clinical setting where it's like, well, are other other treatments other than the one being studied available? Um, Confidentiality, this is huge, that the information that's being collected about them is going to be confidential. And what are the efforts we're making, right? We're going to use tablets to collect this data. Are the tablets password protected? Will they be kept in a secured area? Will the data be downloaded to a secure server? Who will have access to that information? What type of ethical training have they undergone? What would happen if there's a breach of confidentiality and this information got out? This all will be spelled out in an informed consent form, and we can practice what it means and thinking through how to describe that to the participants. And again, that there's, that the study is voluntary and they can withdraw without repercussions, and not just in that moment, not just at the time you're there, but they could, think on it and do it. And then 5 days later decide, hey, I don't want you to have my information. I don't want that. And we need to be responsive and then explain to them what will happen. We'll destroy that information. We'll remove it from the database. Can it be destroyed from the tablet where it was collected? That I don't know, but those are things we need to think through. And then there needs to be a name and contact information for an investigator. I imagine it's going to be Flora, but could be Patrick, I'm not sure. So who the participant could contact, right? And maybe it makes sense to have someone local, right? Because someone in the settlement where you guys are working, I'm not going to mispronounce the name, Kieran Dogo. They're not going to be able to necessarily email me or Flora and say, please remove my information. Maybe there needs to be, but there needs to be, a local way, but then also like someone who's ultimately responsible and saying like, I'm overseeing the study and I want to make sure everything's up. And then confidentiality, this is huge, right? Participants in research have a right to have the information they share kept confidential, right? And steps must be taken to ensure that only study team members have access to research information and to separate participant identifiers from the information that they share during data collection, right? So once that data collected, you can't have your name on it and say you said this, this, and this, right? There will be efforts to de-identify this data, but then there's also the personal nature, right? You're a person asking them that question or giving them a tablet. You might know something that they share with you, and you as the researcher are obligated to keep that confidential. So from a data side there is, but also from the personal side there is a need to protect confidentiality and respect that autonomy of the participants. So ways that you can maintain participant confidentiality: do assessments, interviews in private spaces, right? Where, and you'll see that that'll change the nature of the information that's shared with you, right? If you're asking sensitive information and you're doing an interview in front of someone's whole family, then they're probably not going to necessarily disclose information that they feel could be risky to them, right? But then there's also the logistics of it. How will these interviews be conducted? Where will you be? Is there a private space? What does private mean, in this setting? Like a locked office room where they come in, or, are you going to be in their homes and trying to find a separate room? And it's, it's not always straightforward, but we need to, be considerate of that. And then them understanding that, personally identifying information won't be linked to the study data, right? So at the time, as they collect it, right, you might be collecting personally identifying information, but that's going to be separated, and we need to explain to them how. Um, and identifying information will only appear on study materials, right? Just for the data we're collecting, right? But not just for public dissemination, right? And usually when the results of these things are described, of course, there's nothing identifiable about a person, but they need to understand that they're not going to say so and this said this. Rather, they'll be like, this many people said this many people said this, and then after the intervention, this many people said, they experienced this problem, which was a reduction and it led to this improvement, right? So and it's important for participants to understand that and that we do this, right? Um, and especially important that research staff should not share any personal information amongst each other. You can't be like, wow, I can't believe this person just told me that. Nor among outsiders, anyone in the community, you can't be like, this person told me this. So, because that you can see how that could easily lead to harm and um, you know unintended consequences in the community, and otherwise people won't trust us, the data won't be reliable, but also you can cause you know unnecessary harm and risk in these people's lives. um, and so I think it's important to clarify participants misconceptions about the study benefits, right? um, Informants must understand that participation in the study will almost not likely benefit them directly. They should be made aware of all the potential risks, such as loss of confidentiality, especially, but any others that we think of. Um, and there are the following benefits of participating, right? That they'll get to receive the Journey of Life intervention, which we know from other research has been beneficial, and we don't think it causes any harm in itself, right? So it's just information. And that ultimately the information may benefit their communities and others. And oftentimes people will participate in research for that reason, right? Because people are altruistic and I think they do want to improve their situations as well as others who they know could benefit from it. Um, and study interviews should make it clear that they're not healthcare providers, they're not giving healthcare advice, they're not giving life advice, they're not psychologists or professionals necessarily. That's not the role. We're here to collect information about them, right? And it's not blurring those lines between research and receiving services. Um, and when there are questions about health or social welfare and social well-being that are asked, they should be referred to the appropriate people, whether or not there's on-site counselors or whether they're TPO staff or when people do indicate being at risk or a problem that needs to be addressed, I think there's an ethical obligation as being in their home and asking them about this stuff or being with them and asking them is that, we try to offer help when available. So, and this is true across research. All research has ethical implications, right? But especially with this sensitive topic and this sensitive population, right? So we always need to think about protecting confidentiality, what happens with the information and being clear about that and explaining it. And then also thinking about, compensating participants, right? It's a way we have of incentivizing participation, right? Why would I take an hour to fill out a survey with you when otherwise I would have that hour not, I would have it free to myself to do what I want, right? So we offer incentives for participation, but we need to think about like, how does that influence someone? Like, do they have no option to refuse because they need that compensation? They can create their own economy, right? Their people's interest in getting like maybe they want to participate more than others, and then do they feel coerced by that participation? Like, these are all things to consider and things that we're thinking about. We need to you know um, be aware of as we're conducting research. So um, two uh, exercises that I've used in the past and in similar types of trainings that could be useful. I don't know if we'll be able to do them today, but there's something maybe Gary, I think, will organize and do later is like a role play, right? Where we take those informed consent forms, break up into pairs, and take turns reading each other the informed consent and putting yourself in the role of a participant and thinking about, would I understand what's being explained to me? Are you explaining this clearly? Is it in language that's understandable? Is it at a pace that I could understand it. How do you deal with questions? You know, and do I understand the answers to those questions, right? So the interview could read the informed consent to the registration. Get comfortable with it, practice it. You know, you don't want it to be the first time that you've done it, right? You don't want to be nervous. You want to know that form well because that form you're going to be doing a lot. And by the end, I'm sure you'll know it like the back of your hand, right? So think about um, how would you answer the questions in there? How uh, would you understand that? Would the participants understand that? And what's the appropriate way to answer things? And it's good to practice that because you might come up with questions you wouldn't expect or get to hear how someone else might answer something. And that you can take turns being the interview and participant and practice those questions and practice how to answer them and getting comfortable with thinking, what does this mean or what is this question? And don't be afraid, I think, to say, I don't know the answer to that question, right? It's better to say that than to just make up an answer that's not correct, right? And say, let me find that out. And especially now in these role plays where we have the opportunity to get these questions answered and Flora and Gary and I'm sure any TPO staff would be helpful to work with that. Um, and then the other thing is to think about what's going to be sensitive topics with these in these interviews, right? Something that I might think isn't a sensitive topic might be extremely sensitive to the participants in this study or to people in different settings, right? So it's great to think through that, and consider like what would you do if someone views something as sensitive or doesn't want to disclose it or is taken back by something that you thought is straightforward or what are ways that you could uh, make that seem less sensitive or make them feel more comfortable or deal with these sensitive issues. I think these are important to think through and can often surprise us and be unexpected. So the more that we're comfortable with it, I think that can help the participants as well. And also, when you're in that situation where you're in front of a participant and it's not just practicing amongst each other, amongst, you know, uh, the research team. So, and what would you do if you didn't know how to deal with something, right? Like, what if something came up that you didn't know? What practicing, how you would deal with that. Um, so those are two exercises. Maybe either we can do today, or maybe it makes sense to do it later once we have the materials ready. Um, and then, just for now, what are your questions? What are your thoughts about this? And we can talk through it. I'm recording this virtually in my um, room here. So obviously, I'll finish this recording, and hopefully we can open this up, and this can lead to a discussion about, hopefully like anything that you had questions about, as well as, um, what are our thoughts on ethics in this research and things we need to be sensitive to, and we can talk through what's going to happen with them for consent and when that'll be available, and we can do these exercises and how it would be the best way to lead them. So since I'm just virtual now, I'm going to end this recording, and then hopefully I'm here in person or whatever, virtual live, to answer those questions and think through them, and hopefully Gary and Laura are able to help with that as well. So thanks for listening, and I'm looking forward to a nice discussion. And please feel free and comfortable to ask questions because this is really the time to do that. And we're here to support you and want to, this is an important aspect of the research and we want it to be as good as possible. So thank you very much.